What's going on, Security Ninjas? Samuel here, and I like to hack things. Today, I have a very special video for you that I think will either help you get started in cybersecurity or help you progress your current career. Here's a quick overview of what I'll be covering. First, we'll talk about the various paths you can take when getting into cybersecurity. Second, I'll cover some of the primary skills that can help you get into those paths or that I think are important for those particular paths in security. Next, we'll talk about how you can go about gaining those skills. And lastly, I'll reflect on my career and tell you the things that have helped me get where I am today and where you can hopefully go as well. All right, let's get started. When you think about cybersecurity, there are probably a few jobs that come to mind. Something like penetration testing or some form of security operations work. Well, the awesome thing about cybersecurity is that there are a ton of potential areas that you can actually work in. For example, you could work in a security operations center as a security analyst, an incident responder, a threat hunter, or even a security engineer. And while these positions sound quite different in name, some of the core skills are actually the same across all these positions. And all the ones I've named are focused on the defensive side of security, but you've probably heard of more of the offensive side of security, so the penetration testing or red teaming. Along with penetration testing and red teaming, there's also vulnerability research and threat research. And when it comes to threat research, in my mind, that's where you blend in both the offensive and defensive skills. And this shouldn't be confused with the active purple teaming. So you may be wondering, how can you make your way into one of these positions that I've already talked about? Of course, there are some fundamental skills that I think are necessary for you to have in order to get a position in any of the areas that I've already named. And I'll go ahead and cover those later in the video. Cybersecurity is a huge career field. There's tons of areas that you can work in, so I don't want to leave out the others like auditing and compliance, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to focus on the more technical side of cybersecurity. So you're probably wondering now, okay, I've learned about some of the roles, so how can I make my way into cybersecurity? And I really wanted to tie that into the skills section of the video. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Determining what skills you need in order to get into one of these roles is often the biggest barrier for the entry into cybersecurity itself. And this, of course, also applies to those of you who are looking to advance their current cybersecurity career. Based on the roles that I've mentioned earlier, and I'll put them on screen here, I believe that there are 4 core areas that you can work on in order to get started in cybersecurity or improve your current career. Those 4 things are as follows: networking fundamentals, operating system fundamentals, programming fundamentals, and of course, cybersecurity fundamentals. You might be wondering why I didn't mention cloud fundamentals, because cloud is becoming a bigger and bigger career field that security individuals or regular tech individuals can move into. To be honest, when you're first getting started, you need to learn the networking fundamentals, because when you look at something like AWS, it's very similar to a traditional network layout. Sure, it's a bit more complex in the terminology and the way things work, but when you look at things like a virtual private cloud or a VPC, it's essentially just a large network that you control access to, and you can build things within that. And that's probably a video for another time, but cloud is a way into security, but I feel like you need to have those fundamentals before you even try to get started in it. So why these 4 things specifically? Because I feel like if you have these 4 skill sets or these 4 areas of expertise, it'll make you a well-rounded security professional. So let's jump into the first one, the networking fundamentals. Having the ability to understand how data traverses the TCP/IP stack will take you a long way in your career. For example, let's say you're working as a Tier 1 analyst in the SOC and an alert fires for a potentially malicious connection from one of your endpoints. If I, as the SOC lead, were to ask you to take a look at this alert, there might be some expectation that you know what you're looking at or have a general understanding of what's happening in this network capture. This could be something simply as a system making a connection over port 80, so the HTTP port, to an outbound host. If we were using a tool like Wireshark, which is a network analysis tool, allows you to analyze packet captures, we would be able to see like where this host is talking to, what IP address it is talking to, and potentially what it is saying. Another example is if this host or two hosts were talking over the network on SMB or port 445, this may be normal for a regular system to talk to a domain controller in a Windows environment, but two normal hosts talking to each other could spell trouble. And I know that kind of blends in with the operating system fundamentals, but when you combine those skill sets, you'll find that you have a deeper understanding of what should be happening in a network and what shouldn't be happening. So having a grasp of how a network should function, both internally and externally, such as talking to the internet or internally with the switches and routers, how those things are configured to allow systems to talk to each other can really help you when it comes to doing things like defensive security and offensive security. All right, on to operating system fundamentals. Now, I don't want to go too in-depth on operating system fundamentals because we could find our way into system internals, and that is a whole other topic. There are a few things when it comes to the basics of operating systems that I expect someone to possibly know. So first off, understanding what types of programs can run in Windows and Linux environments, and of course, which ones can and cannot run on each system. The basic file structure of a Windows host and even a Linux host, and in some cases, a Mac OS host. What type of logs that can be generated in a typical enterprise, such as logon events, process execution events, network connection events, and so on. By simply understanding the data that comes along with those event types, you can quickly determine what is happening in a given time frame on a host, assuming those logs are actually available. So to go back to our networking example, if we're talking about a potential host talking out to a potentially malicious domain or creating a potentially malicious event on an endpoint, if we have access to those endpoint logs or those system logs, we could probably find out what process was executing these potentially malicious actions, where it was connecting out to, and so on. I'm not saying that you have to be a pro when it comes to operating systems or understanding everything about an operating system, but having the fundamentals down can go a long way. All right, the next one up is programming fundamentals. Okay, so I know what you're probably thinking. I have to be a programmer to work in cybersecurity? The answer is, of course not. What I mean by programming fundamentals is having the basic understanding of programming flow or how a program's execution should flow. So let's go back to our example that we used in networking fundamentals and operating system fundamentals. Let's say we have access to the PowerShell logs of a Windows endpoint in this event. And PowerShell is a scripting language that you can run in Windows environments and Linux environments. So if we have a general understanding of programming logic or how the execution of a script or a program should run, when we look at these PowerShell event logs, we can probably quickly determine what is actually happening during this event. We may be able to see, is this program or the script the one causing these malicious events or these potentially malicious connections? And to explain what a script is versus a program has to be compiled using an IDE for that specific language. A script or a command line interface language is something that allows you to type real quick on the fly and hit enter and go. No compiling needed. So in our example, we aren't a pro, right? We're simply looking at the data that's available and making a determination using logic or the understanding of how a program should flow to determine what is actually going on in this potentially malicious event. So we're most likely able to break down the PowerShell script to find out, is it the one making these potentially malicious connections? And now what I'm really trying to say is having a basic understanding of programming logic and the flow of programs can go a long way when it comes to both offensive and defensive security. Now, let me be honest with you. No one is expecting a new person in cybersecurity to go straight into reverse engineering a malicious binary or a malicious program. That would be very questionable. Most organizations are going to have tools that allow you to put that binary in and it will tear it apart for you. But so you should know that there is a career path called reverse engineering or malware analysis that allows you to actually tear apart those potentially malicious programs to understand what they're doing. Okay, so moving on to what are the cybersecurity fundamentals that you should know? Well, that's actually a tough question because you might remember that I mentioned there are a ton of areas of security that you can actually work in. So here are a couple things you could focus on in combination with your operating system and your networking fundamentals. You could look at things like operating system hardening through patch management and vulnerability assessments, network hardening through the use of least privilege. What that means is only giving a user access to what they need. So we're not going to give our accountants domain admin, so the ability to create changes across the entire environment, right? They only need access to do their job. And we're not going to give them more privileges than they actually need. And this is actually a big thing that you should keep in mind when doing security, is you should always push for something like least privilege, because if a compromise happens in an environment and a user has more privileges than they need, that can actually cause a bigger wildfire, so to speak. Understanding the basics of cryptography like web traffic encryption, email encryption, and so on. And as you learn more about the fundamentals of operating systems and networks, you'll also see how security plays a role in those as well. One final skill that I did want to mention, it's not really a technical skill, it's more of a kind of a mental thing. Having that innate curiosity or always wanting to figure out how things work, or that persistence and that drive to learn as much as possible. And you'll find that if you are passionate about cybersecurity as you get further into your career, you'll find you'll be spending plenty of hours digging into things or digging into how potentially new attacks work. And that's where things start to get really interesting, is when you find out what you're passionate about in security. All right, so now that we know the kind of core skills you should be focused on, you're probably wondering, where can I actually gain these skills or practice these skills? So here are a few examples for networking fundamentals. First off, I suggest picking up a book about network administration. Also, if you have the capability to sign up for a Cisco Academy account so that you can get your hands on Packet Tracer. Packet Tracer is an amazing tool. It may be discontinued now, but there's still ways to get access to it. It's a tool that allows you to build virtual networks using Cisco products, but it's really cool because you actually have to, understand the concepts of how the communications flow between the endpoints and the switches and the routers, and you can even set up fake internets. It's a great tool that I suggest getting your hands on, or you could practice with a tool like Visio or Draw.io. You won't be able to do the networking concepts, but if you draw out the maps and you kind of write down how you expect these things to communicate, that's building on that knowledge and on that potential book of network administration you picked up. The next thing I suggest is looking at a network analysis course. So something using Wireshark or Archime to analyze network traffic or the packet captures that come from network traffic, and really dig into how those things actually look and kind of what data is available to you in those. You could also go the certification route. You could try to tackle the Network Plus, or at least pick up a study book for Network Plus so you can learn the basics. And I always recommend CompTIA because they are vendor neutral, as opposed to saying, go try out the CCNA from Cisco. That's a great cert, don't get me wrong. It will teach you the basics, but Network Plus is a little lower on the basics, as in it's focused on the broader basics and not the specific tools or devices that you would use in a Cisco training or a Cisco book. Also, if you can sign up for a course at your local college or university, that is always an option. For operating system fundamentals, here are a few options you have. First, I recommend looking into a hypervisor. And what that is a product like VMware, Workstation or Player, or VirtualBox. These allow you to put virtual machines or non-physical computers on your actual computer. So that way you can spin up a Windows host on your Mac or a Linux host on your Windows, and vice versa. That way, once you actually spin those up, your virtual machines, you can start playing around with the operating systems. Figure out how the file formats work, what the file structures look like, and how you can run commands, and what kind of logs are generated, and so on. Another option is to take a help desk or a sysadmin course from your local college, Udemy, Pluralsight, or even something free on YouTube. And one thing I will mention, you're going to be Googling a lot of stuff. And honestly, that's okay, because you can talk to any security professional and they'll tell you they're always looking things up. And that's how we continuously learn, isn't it? You could also go the certification route, such as CompTIA or the Microsoft Administrator certifications. And I will say that Microsoft has a great library of videos of how to manage Windows pieces of software or their operating systems. And even if you're not planning on being a sysadmin, these are some great courses to go through because they will teach you the basics of that operating system. All right, for programming fundamentals, I suggest checking out these resources. First up, I suggest checking out Code Academy. They provide a wide array of programming languages that you can actually get started on. And honestly, this may be enough for the initial jump into programming or programming logic, because it'll teach you the basics of Python, JavaScript, and HTML, and of course CSS. I believe they're also adding other languages on there as well. Another favorite of mine that I suggest is Over the Wire and Under the Wire. These are actually CTFs that use the Windows and Linux command line. So essentially what you're doing is you're learning some programming logic, but you're also learning operating system fundamentals through the use of these scripting languages. Another option you could take is sign up for a programming course through Udemy, Pluralsight, or even through your local college. And finally, for cybersecurity fundamentals, I suggest taking a look at various online courses and resources here on YouTube. Next, you'll probably want to look into CompTIA's Security Plus or ISC Squared SSCP. Now, you may look at these and they say they require a few years of experience, but that shouldn't stop you from picking up a book and learning the fundamentals, even if you don't plan on taking the certification. But that certification could help you get a job, so consider that with your options. Also, some fun things to do that also incorporate operating systems and network fundamentals is more CTFs like Try Hack Me, Hack the Box, and other things like that. I know, who waits till the end of a video to talk about themselves? I honestly wanted to give you the most information at the beginning of the video so that you could go through it piece by piece and get what you needed out of it. Okay, so I got my start in IT and security, well, really IT, back when I was a kid in high school. I was always tinkering with computers and messing around with various scripting languages, mainly on the command line or Python and JavaScript when I was trying to do some web development stuff. I went to school for computer science for a little bit, dropped out of that, ended up getting a job as a help desk admin and a sysadmin later on. I really enjoyed doing that, and I finally got the opportunity to move over to a tier 1 SOC analyst. That was a lot of fun, got to see a lot of cool attacks. Then I moved on to vulnerability assessment and pen testing, adversary emulation, and finally on to red teaming. What I feel has helped me the most in my career is that constant desire to learn more about what I'm trying to understand for my job, whether that be how to write this program to do X, Y, or Z, how this new attack works, or what this looks like on the defensive end of the attack, and things like that. Having that desire to always be learning. And that's the cool thing about cybersecurity is things change all the time. So you're always having to learn. And if you don't, you kind of get behind. But having that constant research methodology to look up new things and find areas of security that you're interested in can help drive that passion in the right direction. I was also lucky enough to have my former employer help pay for my GX certifications and my CISP. I won't say that those 100% contributed to my current success, but they did help because that shows you're passionate about those things. Even if it's getting something from CompTIA or eLearn Security, when you do something like that, it not only boosts your internal motivation and your internal skill sets, but also makes you look more valuable to potential employers, because they're going to want somebody most likely who's passionate about the work they do and that they can rely on, especially in high stress incident response situations or offensive operations. So my final piece of advice to you is please rewatch the video, take a look at the information I provided, start digging into different security paths and different job postings, and find out what, sparks or piques your interest in a particular role or particular tool or particular activity. And I think once you do something like that, you'll find what you're truly passionate about in cybersecurity, and that can help drive your path. And what's cool about security is you can also switch to the other side. So I did a lot of defensive stuff, and now I'm on the offensive side. And those skills are transferable. So don't think just because you're going to be a SOC analyst or you're going to be an entry-level incident responder that you're stuck there. Because as you grow in your career, your passions will change and your interests will change. And that's really one of the cool things about cybersecurity is you can move to different roles as long as you're kind of building those extra skill sets on the side. All right, so if you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe and check out my other videos such as the best entry-level certification or what is threat hunting or some more of the technical content. All right, thank you so much for watching my video today.